that a fun tune? That is a cut from the new musical, an adaptation of A Christmas Carol called A Red Carol, written by my guest today. In fact, my guest is a mover and shaker in the Bay Area theater scene. That's right. And not only is he a gifted director and actor, but he is also a very well-established playwright. He's the resident playwright for the San Francisco Mime Troupe. The San Francisco Mime Troupe. A troupe of mimes. Not the kind of mimes you think, though. Yes. You'll find out if you listen. His plays have been the biggest hits of the Mime Troupe's history. His adaptation of a Dickens Christmas Carol, which opens tonight, A Red Carol, is available on the website of the San Francisco Mime Troupe and will also be playing on numerous radio stations throughout the country and perhaps the world for the next couple of weeks. His 1984 critically acclaimed play, a stage adaptation of George Orwell's classic novel, 1984, opened at the Los Angeles Actors Gang Theater under the direction of the Academy Award-winning actor Tim Robbins. Tim Robbins. That's impressive. I have to say that. I find that very impressive. It has had repeated extended runs in Los Angeles. It's toured Australia, Europe, Asia, Central and South America, and 40 of our 50... How many states do we have? 50 states. We don't have 52. No, 50 states. Why do you always want to say there are 52 states? I don't know. Yeah, Michael J. Sullivan is my guest today. And he is a stalwart, one of the most influential theater artists in the San Francisco Bay Area. And it was my pleasure to speak with him. I'd only met Michael because I've auditioned for him maybe 15 times. So it was actually fun to have a real conversation with him rather than being in the audition room doing my monologue and song and saying thank you very much, goodbye. But seriously, this is one of my favorite conversations that I've had since The Green Room has been on air, and it's been my pleasure, and I am so glad that our mutual friend, Michael, the Mime Troupe's publicist, Lawrence Hellman, got us together to do this show. So without any further ado, folks, Michael Gene Sullivan. There we go. Hey, Michael.
Hey, how you doing, Ray?
I'm okay. How are you?
Okay. All right. I've been recording all day also, so I'm like, breaking. Yeah. Well, I've got to record there are a lot of songs in the Red Carol, and so I've been recording them all morning, and so they can send them off to me, basically, me and the musical director, and then we'll, and the audio engineer, and we'll be putting them together.
Yeah. So Red Carol has music. It's not a musical though. It's a play.
No, it is not a musical. It's weird because most mime troupe shows, despite the fact that people think that we do silent mime, not only we do not silent mime, we do musicals. What I tell people sometimes is a mime troupe show is like seeing a Broadway play, only it has a point. And it's small, and we do it on our little stage, and we take it around, and we're obviously advocating for things, but not just preaching, to the audience. Yeah. And so the shows are always musicals, or almost always musicals, whereas Red Carol is a play with music.
Yes.
The songs exist inside the show in a different way. There's a Christmas caroling choir that Scrooge hears outside of his, counting house / bank, things like that, or the boy caroler singing, different characters that sing songs, not to advance the plot so much as to to kind of enrich the world that we're operating inside of.
Great. I think in recent years, there have been a lot more plays with music. Even on Broadway. I
mean, that particular style, it's more Brechtian, it's more that these people are now singing this song to get this idea across to the audience, and to kind of mess with the artifice of musical comedy, or musicals where suddenly burst into song. The idea with bursting into song is always that what you're saying can only be communicated in this much bigger way. It's a way that if we lived in that world, it would be noisier, but also that people would express things. Music is a way to express what cannot be simply put into words. You can hear, somebody can say they're sad and you can understand it intellectually, but if you hear sad music, we all have the same response to it, unless of course we're psychos.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's what you do in a musical, and in a play with music, when you're just, you're doing it in a different way to try to interact with the audience emotionally and intellectually in those moments, because they have to think of, why is this song not just, why is the guy just not breaking into on the street where you live or something, but doing it in a different way.
Yeah. In a musical, it's given that the fourth wall is going to be broken. And so people have become used to that and can still stay in the world. Whereas in a play with music, it's Brechtian, as you say, because it makes you think about, why do they play this song here now? What is it telling me about the message they're trying to give me? It kind of makes you, as you say, it makes you think.
Right. It's a different, like I said, that different style of talking directly to the audience about the play you're in, rather than rather than expanding your heart for the audience. You're putting us all in a theater and going, this is what's happening right now. So it's a very specific, different style that the Mime Troupe has used in the past. But like I said, most of our shows are more musical.
Yes.
Traditional musical.
Right.
So this is also different for us.
Oh, okay.
Besides the fact that it's a radio play.
Yes. It's a radio play. And I would like to... I'll just say, this is the second time that Michael and I have talked. Yesterday, I forgot to push record. But it's fun because I was thinking about something. We were talking about the Mime Troupe yesterday and the name of the Mime Troupe. And there might be people here who don't understand why it's called the San Francisco Mime Troupe. And I was driving down the road this morning and I was thinking that it might, like, if somebody didn't know what the San Francisco Mime Troupe was, they might think of young, skinny men in tight clothes with white makeup climbing invisible ropes as a troupe, as a troupe, like running down the street, but that's not what it is, right?
Not exactly. Yeah, I was thinking when we started talking, I was like, it's more like we're continuing the conversation we were having yesterday. People are like dropped into the middle of this conversation.
Very strange, yes.
Yeah, so it's like, hi, I'm Gene Sullivan, and I'm the resident playwright, actor, and director with the Tony and Obie Award-winning San Francisco Mime Troupe. And so the mime bit. So mime. Is the definition is the exaggeration of everyday life in story and song. It doesn't have to be silent. I'm wearing leotards, trapped in a glass box, pulling a rope against the wind or whatever. That is a type of mime. Yeah. Mime comes from the word mimic. In ancient Greek theater, there was mimos. You would use mimicry. Like if you want to do a play where you want to say stuff about Pericles, but you don't necessarily want to say you're Pericles because he might have you thrown off a cliff. Instead, you pick up on some aspect of Pericles that everybody will know who you're talking about, but it's not technically libel or something. So mimos has always been this type of theater used in satire to exaggerate everyday life in story and song, like I said. And people know that. If you go to England and people will go, oh, I went to see this panto. Oh, I loved the panto so much. Yeah. It was so hilarious. And then you go, it's pantomime. It's pantomime. And they, okay. English, they all sound exactly like that.
Ooh.
So,
they all sound like Maggie Smith on Downton
yes,
Abbey.
Right.
Oh, darling.
So mime is this form where you can use sound and song and all of this. It's just slightly bigger than real life. It's kind of like opera is bigger than real life, or musical theater is bigger. Yeah. And so, but what happened was, so up until like World War II, everybody in the United States, long story, never mind. Yeah. Anyway, people knew what mime was. Right. But then after World War II, Marcel Marceau becomes an international star, in part because he was a hero of the French underground in World War II. And they wanted to kind of share and say, France is back. Please come visit us. Here's part of our culture that we can share. He was a silent mime, and he became a huge star. And at that very time, the mime troupe had already been named with the old version of exaggerated everyday life and story and song. Yeah. And so they're out there doing stuff and singing and dancing and doing all this stuff. And then Marcel Marceau is touring, doing this massive world tour with silent mime. And the mime troupe's like, everybody will know that's different. Yeah, that didn't work. So between that and then in the early 70s, but the mime troupe kept going. They'd already done their tours. They'd already gotten, arrested. They were in the news. They were in textbooks and stuff. Yeah. And then in the early 70s, Michael Shields and, I can't remember Yarnell's first name. Shoot, I'm so sorry. But Shields and Yarnell were a silent mime duet that worked in San Francisco at Fisherman's Wharf.
And they were nationally popular, right? I remember them.
They got a television show.
Yeah.
They had one of those variety television shows.
I used to watch the show. Yeah.
Yeah, I did too. Yeah. But they were silent mimes. And that really cemented in a lot of people's minds that mime was silent. The mime troupe, meanwhile, wins a Tony Award, wins Obie Awards. We've got all of this stuff. Like I said, we're in textbooks. People study us all over. But we still have the name, and we can't change it. It's too late.
Well, I think it's a great name.
Yeah, we end up being an open secret. Sometimes I think that if the mime troupe had changed their name, we would have been crushed decades ago, considering how radical our politics are. Our symbol is still a big red star. Yeah. We are a worker-owned, collectively run theater company that is always doing our comic critiques of capitalism and imperialism. Yeah. And we would have been infiltrated and shot in our beds decades ago if it wasn't for the fact that somebody in the FBI probably went, they're mimes.
What harm can mimes do?
Yeah, really.
Well, I like the name because it makes people think. It makes people ask a question. Mime troupe, what's that?
Yeah, and especially when we started like this year with COVID, we were doing all of these shows. We had stuff, like I said, still touring the country and the world, doing plays about social injustice and economic injustice and sexism and racism and classism and all of that. And then this year it was like, with COVID, our free shows in the park, which we normally do free shows. Yeah. We are a full equity company and we make a living doing this when we're doing it, but we do free shows.
Yeah, and I don't know how you do that, but I've always wondered.
We gather money after the show. We pass the hat, just like
that's
the company.
Right.
We would in the early days when I was but a child. The mime troupe would do shows and they would pass the hat after the show, and there were like 100 people out there, and they would give some money, and actors would divide the money up after the show. Now we have audiences of thousands of people. And so, we did one show where we opened to at least 5,000 people one time in Dolores Park in San Francisco. So we get audiences of thousands, and we, and we still pass the hat, but people just are more generous than they were. Some aren't. Some are like, I'm giving you the same buck I gave you in 1970. But other people have kind of realized the time has changed. Yeah. So between that and certain supporters and foundations and money from the NEA, our tax dollars, we should get them. But we don't take money from corporations, which makes us very different from a lot of other theater companies.
We don't take money from corporations.
We don't do corporate sponsorship. We don't, the Bank of America, Wells Fargo, AT&T, PG&E Mime Troupe is not going to happen. That's just part of our core belief that once you start taking money from the big capitalists, they'll try to manipulate you. They will try to control you. They will try to blunt your message about them and capital.
Yeah, having seen a number of your plays, I don't think that would work out.
Yeah, we don't want their money, and interestingly, they haven't tried to give it to us. But yeah, so like I said, we're an equity company, and we have all of these, all the benefits, and we're worker owned and all of that. And I can't remember why I started talking about that.
I don't know.
Yeah,
we're just talking about it.
The conversation.
I remember going to Dolores Park and seeing your shows and the hat being passed around. I think the first time I went was mid '80s. Yeah, yeah. There was a couple hundred people there.
It's a form of theater closer to, the commedia troops that would come into town, into some little Italian town, find out who are the rich people, who are the famous people, who's the local pantalone, what is the political situation. Then they would go back and they would incorporate all that into a show they already had. Then they would do the show, get money, and get the hell out of Dodge before they could be thrown in jail. Yeah, yeah. We're more related to that. That idea.
But in the city, in the late '60s, early '70s, you were thrown in jail, right?
Oh yeah, the Mime Troupe was part of the early free speech battles, and the idea that at the time was that the Mime Troupe was coming in to do free shows in the park, but they were talking about capitalism and the Vietnam War and civil rights. And the city said, basically, wait a minute, we control these parks. You shouldn't be able to say whatever you want.
Yeah.
And the troupe said, well, actually, we should be able to say what we want because this is a public space. This is a city park paid for and supported by city dollars, which are tax dollars. This is free space. This is the commons.
Yeah.
And so the Mime Troupe was arrested at the beginning of a show. They had set up and they had already been warned, if you try to say anything, you'll be arrested. And there were cops right there. And Ron Davis, who was the founder of the company, stood up and said, the San Francisco Mime Troupe presents a bust. And the cops came in, arrested them.
Wow.
And they ended up in court, and different people, there were fundraisers for the Mime Troupe. People don't know this, that Bill Graham, the great rock and roll impresario, was the financial manager for the San Francisco Mime Troupe.
Wow.
When the Mime Troupe got in court and was needed to raise money for their defense, Graham thought, hey, maybe we could do some kind of a concert to raise money. And so they got all of these great bands, Quicksilver Messenger Service, Jefferson Airplane, all of these bands from the the Summer of Love together. And he rented a space and they did this concert to raise money. And then Graham started thinking, wait a minute, we can do this a lot. And so they started being regular concerts to raise money, defense fund for the Mime Troupe, help the Mime Troupe take the show over here or over there. And then eventually Graham realized the real money was in concert promotion. So he left the Mime Troupe and became Bill Graham Presents.
Oh my God, I had no idea.
Which in many ways still exists. They still give us but he always supported the troupe. After he left, he always, if we needed extra money, he would give money. And by the time I got to the troupe, he was still doing that. He hired the troupe. We came down and we sang at a rock concert at Laguna Seca Days. He would still, if we were hard up, we could always ask Bill Graham. And it's super cool. Very nice of him. He didn't forget us.
That guy was what a San Francisco personality he was.
Yeah.
And a great promoter and a promoter of the arts and selfless as hell. That was I loved that guy. I remember when he died, I was really sad.
I was too. That was really tragic. Yeah. Because he gave a personality that things like, Live Nation or what is it? That other Ticketmaster and all these different things, these different promoters don't have that sense of what they do in the community.
Yes.
And that rock and roll was this revolutionary thing of bringing people together and celebrating a completely different style. And he understood that.
Yeah.
And so he always brought his personality and his passion to stuff. I mean, there are still some promoters and producers like that, but it's gotten so corporate now and so samey that it's not the same kind of wild fun it was. But Bill Graham understood that. Yeah. And so, I definitely miss him.
Yeah. And I had no idea he was connected with Mime Troupe.
Oh yeah. He acted a little bit and then he went on to, and then when he realized this is a way I can support this company by doing this, it changed his life. And it changed a lot of stuff. Yeah. And people don't even know. Yeah, he was our guy.
Well, you guys are such a huge part of history of San Francisco over the last 50 years. It's amazing.
The Grateful Dead.
Yeah.
They used to be called the Warlocks. That was their name before that.
Yeah.
Their very first gig where they decided to change their name to something else, the Grateful Dead, was a mime troupe benefit.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did they come up with the name because of the show, or did they just
No, they just were like, we don't have that anymore. And I think it was Phil Lesh was actually in the mime troupe band for like 3 years before he was in the Dead. So like I said, there was a very tight connection in that period between rock and roll and activist theater.
Yes, like so they were all arrested like the same time as Lenny Bruce and those people. And then last year or 2 years ago at Mime Troupe, the son of one of those activists, what was his name? I went over there and I talked to your artistic director and Ginsberg.
Which one? Oh, you mean Mario?
Yeah,
Savio.
Mario. What's his last name?
Yeah, so Savio.
Yeah, Savio. Yeah, Mario Savio.
Yeah, Mario Savio, who was, this great activist, speaker, passionate fellow who, for a lot of people, he is emblematic of the free speech movement as it erupted at University of Berkeley. His son is in the mime troupe.
Yes.
Musical director, and he's composer, lyricist. He's working with me on Red Carol right now. I'll have to get in touch with him later today, as a matter of fact.
There you go.
And so that tradition and how that lives on. One of the lines that I put in this past summer, the mime troupe. Oh, okay, now I can reel this back. Let's go back to where I started to diverge. The idea of mimes on the radio and how much that confuses people. The idea, Violet, what the hell are you doing on the radio? It's like a Zen lesson or something.
Pure silence.
Right. But we made this decision because of COVID. It's like, damn, we've got to do something else. Let's do radio plays. So we did 20 weeks of the San Francisco Mime Troupe's Tales of the Resistance, which was these different ideas of things coming in with different storylines about police brutality and about public health workers and unemployment and corporations taking over and stuff. We did this as this, like I said, 10 episodes, 20 weeks, free on the radio, and we got radio stations across the country to play the series. And Daniel had to come up with all of this underlying music for radio plays because it's very different than a regular play. The feelings that you get from the music and how that threads through it.
Yeah.
So when we came around, we got to the end of the summer and we were like, that was great. Everybody had a great time. We worked with actors all over the country. We had our we had one song written by a guy who's in Switzerland right now. He wrote music and lyrics for one song. He's actually Daniel's cousin, Jeremy Mage. And so it opened up our world in a way. And we were like, we don't want to let go of this. Even if next year, if COVID, if the vaccination works or the many vaccinations work and the parks open up and we can do shows again, free in the parks and around the country, we still want to keep doing the radio plays. And so we were like, how can we keep our presence in the radio world, to keep this idea of activist theater, not preachy, didactic theater, but fun and entertaining activist theater across the world.
Yeah.
And it just so happened I had my adaptation of A Christmas Carol.
Red Carol, it's called, right?
Red Carol, yes.
And it's going to be playing on radio stations in the Bay Area. And then it was December 11th. I left my notes.
Yes, it starts December 11th. It'll be on the radio stations. And like I said, we're trying to get the stations around the country also. Like we had a couple of stations in the Midwest and a station in Washington, D.C. to try to get as many stations as we can. And the other thing is with Red Carol. So it's an interesting story. So I wrote the adaptation of Red Carol because I felt like people had misunderstood and misrepresented what Dickens was trying to do with Christmas Carol. We live in a post-Christmas Carol, post-Dickens world, and he changed the world so much with these stories that we no longer see the change. You know, when people think they see Christmas Carol and they go, oh, it's this cute story about this one mean guy. And if everything else is great, you know, you'll see it and the play starts off and it's London and everyone's smiling and happy and there's Christmas songs going on and young children are begging, but they get money and they're happy and the people who give them money is happy and everything's fine. And then this one cloud of Scrooge walks in and he's terrible. And if only he would change, everything would be great.
Yeah.
The problem is almost all of that is wrong. The poor laws in England at the time made it almost illegal to give money to starving people on the street. And it was illegal for them to beg. People were begging not out of the joy of Christmas, but to keep from starving to death. And it was seen as okay because with a history of the aristocracy and the nobility, the English really had a philosophy. And because they were the center of an empire, this philosophy spread everywhere that you get what you get because you're predestined for that. Mm-hmm. If you're well off, it's because you're naturally a better person. Yeah. You're born better, you live better, you deserve it from birth. And if you're poor and if you're starving, if you're destitute, if you're diseased, all of these things that happen to you during your life, that's your lot in life because God has ordained it that way. You were born there for a reason. And all of that is your fault. But don't worry, in the next life, things will even out. Yeah. But right now, if you're poor and hungry and starving, that's on you. It's not just that you can work your way up because their system didn't have a work your way up part.
It was ordained by God.
Yeah, it's like
Calvinism and all that stuff.
System. Yeah. And you're supposed to suffer in life. Yeah. Unless, of course, you're rich. And so Dickens looks at this world and because he grew up poor, but he did manage to work his way up through his talent, his brains. But he still wanted to say that this system is wrong. These people aren't naturally better. They're not a different kind of person. They're all just people. And the idea of a commonality of humanity, which the English at that time in many cultures just didn't recognize. Dickens invents it for the Western culture. This idea of sharing, if you're well off, giving money to someone who's not as well off because they're a fellow human being. You know, it's almost from each according to his ability to each according to his need. The idea that these are your fellow humans and what you share with them is much greater than the differences between you and them because of skin color, because of religion, because of race, because of whatever. That idea of us all being in this together. Dickens invents those characters. Fred's speech when he talks about, we're fellow human beings and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. Audiences hear that every year, but it's just that much in the play. Or when the charitable people come in and they're like gathering money up for the poor so that they don't have to go to a workhouse and don't have to go on the treadmill. Those ideas of just helping people because they're your fellow people. Like I said, it was almost illegal at the time. And the idea, Americans especially, or not even just Americans, moderns in the West, the idea of the workhouse and the treadmill, we hear it every year when we see the play. But what is a workhouse? It is a place that you are taken or have to go because you can't get a job. And they throw you in a workhouse. In workhouses, work was so Puritan. It was work for work's sake. They used to have this thing in a workhouse. It was a box, and it was a box full of rocks, and it had a handle on the side you had to turn. It didn't do anything. It was simply difficult. And that was supposed to make you a better person. Just work for work's sake. Yeah. And when people see Christmas Carol and they hear, oh, the treadmill, and they're thinking, hey, it's like 24-hour fitness. You work those calves. And it's like, no, the treadmill was a huge barrel-like thing with a ladder on the side that you're climbing up while you're chained to it all day long to improve your soul. It's just to keep you better. And then eventually they realized they could also grind wheat with it and corn. Yeah. So they started putting these people to work, but they're not paying them. You're basically in a prison because you're poor and you're being put to work all the time. And all of it is, you're not given good food. You're not treated well because you're not supposed to get addicted to the generosity of the workhouse. You're not supposed to feel good with the ease of the treadmill. So they're always making it harder and harder. It's horrible.
Yeah.
But when the audience hears that every year, when they see Christmas Carol, they're like, meh. Oh, that sounds weird. I'm never going to have to deal with that. I'm never going to have to deal with this idea of a society that sees being poor as making you a lesser human being. But we are increasingly shifting towards that. We have been over the last, really since Reagan was elected, this idea shifting back to a pre-Dickensian social attitudes.
Yeah.
San Francisco tried to pass laws against giving money to the homeless. They're like, oh, no. You just give them a piece of paper and they can go somewhere.
Oh, yes. I remember that.
And it was like, what's wrong with you? Giving money to the poor doesn't encourage, or not the poor, the homeless.
Yeah.
Giving money to the homeless doesn't encourage them to be homeless. It's not like, hey, this is really working out for me. That is such a weird, libertarian, heartless thought that I'm surprised those people weren't run out of every city where they tried to push that as a concept and as a protocol. It is so wrong. And we never apply that rule to the rich.
And the only quote unquote homeless that it works out for are the ones who are con artists.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not the actual homeless.
Right. And do you really want to pass rules that it's kind of like what the Republicans have been trying to do in the last election, which is we're going to throw out all of these votes because we might have evidence that 3 or 4 votes.
Exactly.
It's like, no, you throw out those 3 or 4 votes. You don't disenfranchise all these people. And in the same way with people who are destitute, people who are homeless, people who are simply unfortunate at this particular moment, you don't go, well, we can't help any of them because some of them might be criminals.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's just being a selfish dick. That is just a self-justification,
Totally. And it does, like you say, it never applies to the rich.
Right.
And how many selfish dicks are there who are rich, like super rich?
And we give them all of these tax breaks.
Countless.
We give them so much money. We give them so many breaks. We give them so many contracts for municipal public works and stuff. And then when they defraud the public, we may ask them to pay the money back, but that doesn't mean the next corporation, the next rich person doesn't get the same deal. We don't judge all of them and treat them as a society the way we treat the criminal elements of the aristocracy, but we're always encouraged to do that with all the working class people.
Yeah. No. And like you say, since Reagan, it's gotten worse. I was just talking to my wife about that. She's from France. She didn't know it. And and most Americans don't realize it because they were enchanted by Reagan's ability to speak in front of people and seem like a great leader and your grandfather and everything. But behind the scenes, he did some awful, horrible things to this country that we're still suffering from and that are actually being increased. That's why I'm so happy Biden won the election.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
I mean, there's a chance.
I know he's not a progressive, but it's better than having just a con man, which is what we had for the last 4 years, was just a failed businessman con man who would say anything to convince people. But that gives you an idea of how messed up things are in this country, that people who are proudly in the working class would rather believe a billionaire is their representative,
It's crazy.
And people... Yeah, but it's like you should be proud to be in the working class, and this is a big part of Red Carol. So what I did with Christmas Carol was make it more from the working class perspective. Yeah. Like I said, the idea that Scrooge represents the one person who, if he changes, everything changes, is just a lie. Dickens wrote the book. It's like Scrooge represents a mindset, a general mindset. He is the worst example of a general mindset about how you see other people, how you deny your common humanity, how it's all about profit, how it's all about what can you achieve for yourself, and the acceptance of different types of human beings on a like a ladder of evolution or something. He's an example of this common philosophy that Dickens saw around him at the time. So that making that shift, part of it is remembering that you have to have pride in yourself and what you're doing and how you demand that. If you make a living in this country, if you work for a living, like if you didn't have a job, you wouldn't have money. You haven't inherited anything and you're not living off of investments. You're in the working class.
Yeah.
Now there are people who've made so much money that they can stop working. They're no longer in the working class. They are in the capitalist class, but it's just owners and workers, people who make money off of their investments, capitalists, and people who make money off work, the workers. There's no middle class. Right. Middle class is just an invention of the capitalists to divide the workers. Middle class is workers with a mortgage. Middle class is workers who see themselves as upwardly mobile to be a boss, rather than seeing all of the other workers as their brothers and sisters in a movement. It's so easy to divide the workers with, oh, this person's black, and oh, this person's gay, and oh, this person's trans, and this person's an immigrant. This is a woman. This is, and it's like, that's done to us. And it wasn't always like this in the United States. Saying that period of, Workers United and the United Front and international working organizations, where people were proud to say they're in the working class. Yes. Instead of working as a barista somewhere and insisting that you're middle class. It's like, that you're a capitalist. Yeah. It's like, you're not a capitalist. Are you making money off your capital? No, then you're not a capitalist. But by having that thing in your head of, no, I am, it's like capitalism becomes like, it's democracy. It's what we live in. It's what we have to have. And it's like, no, it's not. There are other systems. Yeah. And so what I wanted to do, another thing, is to see Christmas Carol as Red Carol from the worker's perspective. So it's from the perspective of Cratchit. Cratchit telling this story to the audience. Some other background. So when I first wrote Red Carol, it was a stage play. And we did a reading. The first reading of the play was done at Occupy Oakland. Yeah. And we were
Was it in the park?
It was in front of Oakland City Hall.
Oh yes, I remember them. Yeah.
And it was like Christmas Eve, I think, and we did the reading, and we were maybe going to do like a tour. People were like, "Can you do a tour of Occupy camps the following year to do Red Carol over and over?" And we were like, "Absolutely!" We got press. AP sent a reporter. There were photographs on the cover of the LA Times and press all over the place, but Occupy was brutally crushed and mainly forgotten by a lot of people. Yeah. So the encampments, which are just homeless encampments, which the United States has had really very much since the Reagan period again. But the idea of the show was it was taking place at an Occupy encampment. That was the concept of the show. Those same encampments we'd had since the Jodes were in Grapes of Wrath, since the Depression, people who were just itinerant workers that had to be pushed by capitalism around and lost their farms. And so I had it. So it takes place at an encampment, and it's a group of people at the encampment telling this particular audience this particular story to try to teach them something, to say, this is the world we live in, and this is the world you live in, and why, change it. And so the stage version, one of the things that I did was I had Tiny Tim killed. Yes. Now the way I started with him, because the story is being told by Cratchit, that means it's in the past tense. Yeah. And since Scrooge, in his telling of the story, hasn't changed, Tim's dead. Now, in the play, the way I did this was I had Cratchit was holding like a teddy bear that he would talk to. This was his stand-in for Tim, and it was very heartbreaking for him that when he talks about him, he's always like, he's going to get better, but he's already passed.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And like I said, I wanted to really show the brutality of the system. But when we got to doing the radio play version, there was no way to do that. So right. I had to resurrect Tim. So we do have a tiny Tim in this version. And he's a super cute kid and with a cute little voice. But what I did also in both versions is I used what you and I know as actors is the what's called the dramaturgy. All of the research that goes into it, like the stuff about what the treadmill is. Yeah. I put that in the play. Characters step out and say, this is what the treadmill is. This is what the poor laws were. This is what the workhouse is, to the audience who don't understand them. Yeah. Part of my hope is that they will never be able to look at one of those other versions of Fun Christmas Carol the same way again.
And you also added back in things that were cut, right? Pieces. Yeah.
There are these amazing things. If you ever get the chance, everybody read the novel. It's not that long. And it is, there are these things you'll notice that were cut from most productions. Like there's an interaction that happens between Scrooge and the Ghost of Christmas Present, where Scrooge kind of verbally attacks Christmas Present and says, you keep saying you want to make people feel better and all of this, and it's all about abundance and enjoyment of life and brotherhood and love. But during the rest of the year, all these ministers and priests, your priests, your spokespeople are all saying this world is about suffering. And that in the next life is where you get, peaches and cream. Right. But in this life, it's all about suffering. And the Ghost of Christmas Present turns to Scrooge and goes, no, those ministers and priests, they are not on our side. They do not even know us. They only preach for their own greed, their own selfishness, their own cruelty, their own power. Put their preaching is about them and not us. And a lot of people cut that section because, they don't want to offend the overly religious who think this is a story about either apolitical or about Jesus, and it's not. Yeah. That part is so important to give people some perspective, to really say this is our life, and how you are treated in this life and what you do with this life is not totally in your hands. It is in the hands of the culture and societies we create. Yeah. And that message of the Ghost of Christmas Present, coupled with your explanation to the audience of what the workhouse was, what the treadmill will give the play a completely different flavor, I would suspect. Yeah, it's much more, it goes back and forth between these very serious moments. Like the part, there's always this part in every production, because it is in the book. But I think that Dickens understood that his readers at the time would get the context. Scrooge comes out of his counting house. It's a bank. That's where he works. Counting house, bank. Mm-hmm. He's a banker. He comes out of his bank, and there's a little kid standing there singing a Christmas carol normally. Some cute little Christmas tree, Christmas tree. And Scrooge turns and goes, bah, humbug. And the kid goes, yelp, and runs away. And the audience cracks up because it's an example of Scrooge being mean. Yeah. But what a reader of the original Dickens would have understood is that at that time in a big city, like half of the funerals were for kids under 10. Because all of these families that had been pushed off of their lands, off of their farms, or not their farms, but also farms that they worked at because of the enclosure movement that happened in England, which was dividing up farms and stuff and making it so you couldn't just raise your goat and have it feed on the common. Suddenly everything was blocked off. And they were pushed to the cities and working in factories that they had no experience in. And the families got broken up and the kids were just orphans in the streets. And so they're singing, that kid at the beginning of A Christmas Carol is singing so that they can get some money to not die. Yeah. It's not about the joy of Christmas. It's not about how much they love standing in rags in the snow. They're starving to death. And so when Scrooge barks at that kid and they run away, that's a horror who understands the situation. Right. But for a modern American audience, they chuckle their butts off. You know, isn't that cute? Well, because it's all about, don't worry, Scrooge will change. Well, it's always the way. It's also the way it's staged. You know, the choices that
directors make on how to stage it, right? Because, right. I mean, people expect something from A Christmas Carol if they go to one of the regular theaters, and they wouldn't want to get your message, probably.
Yeah, that's a whole other story. But so what I did in this play is when that moment happens, I stop and talk about it.
Yeah.
You know, Cratchit turns out to the audience and says, this is what just happened.
Yeah.
This is the history of the situation. That's what everybody laughs at.
Right.
And I remember doing I was in A Christmas Carol for years at ACT. And I remember one time after a show, I was in the lobby asking for money. We were in full costume. They would have us go out to the lobby, and we would ask for money both for Equity Fights AIDS.
Yeah.
And I would also say to the audience, if you don't feel like you can give us any money, please remember there are people who live on the steps of this theater who could use any extra change or anything that you have.
Yeah.
And I remember a patron, probably a regular subscriber, who said, after we were asking for that, and I said that, she said, how dare they ask for money after a show like this?
What?
And it's Christmas. She completely missed the point of everything. Christmas Carol, as a play, has become a family tradition.
Yeah.
It's a holiday tradition. The message of Christmas Carol isn't the holiday tradition. It's going.
Yes.
Going to see the show is tradition, not learning anything from it.
Right.
And theaters struggle because many of the theaters totally understand and love the story and the message of it, but because they're owned by banks, because their subscribers are dicks, whatever, they shave off the activist part. Yeah. So much so that the original inspiration for me doing this adaptation was talking to a prominent artistic director who said in passing, well, Dickens didn't mean this to be an activist story. He wasn't an activist writer. And I was like, have you read any of his work? Right. They had justified in their head that no, there was no, he's not trying to make a point. It's like, have you read Hard Times? Have you read David Copperfield? Have you read The Chimes, which is a brilliant story, which is the companion piece to A Christmas Carol, which everybody should read also.
All of his works are commentary on those who are put down in society. All of them. I can't think of any that aren't.
His own father, when it was taken into a workhouse. I mean, these are, a debtor's prison, prison. So all of these things that he talked about that then don't have debtor's prisons in part because of like David Copperfield, because of the story of how wrong that is. So this misunderstanding, misrepresentation of Dickens as this activist is part of why I've had such a hard time getting theater companies around the country to do Red Carol.
Oh, I see. Well, I didn't mean that they shouldn't when I said...
No, but it's not. It's that the theaters that we're so progressive. Yeah. And I'm like, well, I've got this great, this very activist, labor-oriented, version of A Christmas Carol called A Red Carol. And they're like, we can't do Dickens. Because he's like this old chestnut and nobody cares. And it's just, it's what the big theaters do. It's their cash cow. And I'm like, no, but we need to take this writer back. We need to take this activist back into our fold rather than just going, letting him be invalidated by us because the rich and the rich theaters have misappropriated and misrepresented his work. You wouldn't want that to happen to, Toni Morrison,
Right.
You wouldn't want that to happen to, some great commentarian to Coates. And it's like, oh, well, they're doing this version of Tony Coates' work. So therefore, we can't do anything with that. And it's like, no.
Hey, why don't you make a play? Why don't you write a play based on a Toni Morrison novel?
I've actually been in a play based on a Toni Morrison.
Which one?
I did jazz at Marin Theater. Oh, God, it's so hard to remember how long ago. It's a year and a half.
Oh, yeah, I remember. I didn't go see it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a fun show in its own murderous way. But finding things, different works by different people. Like I wrote.
I'm reading The Bluest Eye right now. I think it would be a great play.
There is a very good play version of that.
Oh, there is, because I've been reading. I said this would be a great play. It's even kind of written like a play. I mean, there's all these different little stories.
Lorraine Hansberry Theater Stanley Williams at Lorraine Hansberry Theater. He passed away, but he's their he was artistic director and founder. He worked for like a decade on trying to find a way to do a Blue SI. And they finally, before he passed away, just shortly before he passed away, they finally put up their production, and it was brilliant.
I bet.
So there are works out there, but like for myself, the adaptations that I've done, like, doing Red Carol and my adaptation of 1984, which has it's from a particular point of view, but it's in 5 languages. It's published in 2 languages. It's played around the world. Wow. When the COVID shutdown hit, my 1984 was playing at the Alley Theater in Houston, which is a big theater. Yeah. It was on a national tour with a New York theater, the Aquila Theater. Or Aquila Theater, as they pronounce it, theater. And it was playing in Seattle. All 3 had to stop. And it had just closed in Los Angeles before that with Tim Robbins playing the lead.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Well, that is exciting.
Yeah, it was cool.
Except for the part where it had to close.
Right. But that, picking something that you're going to do as an adaptation, it's like, how interesting is it? And what are you seeing? What are you adding to it as the adapter because there's all the stuff you can't say. So what you pick, the way you pick to go through it is how you're affecting the audience. Yeah. My 1984 is about the audience and how we accept torture in our names, how we accept warfare, how we accept all this propaganda that we kind of know is a lie, but we still accept it. Why weren't we just so outraged and in the streets when Abu Ghraib happened? Yeah. Or with Guantanamo. Right. Why are we not? What sort of person would accept that? And how badly have we allowed our society to twist those people who are committing those war crimes and torture? And those people have to come back and live amongst us. Yeah. You don't know if the person sitting next to you on the bus is somebody who was torturing somebody in Guantanamo.
Don't we still have kids in cages down at the border?
Yes.
Does anyone talk about it anymore? No.
Right. I mean, those kids that are locked in cages, all of these terrible things that are done in our name corrode us as people. Yeah. And so in my adaptation of 1984 is about other people being corroded by their acceptance of what must be done in their name because they're in danger. Very much what the Republicans and Trump did. Yeah. You're in danger. You're always in danger. And if I can make you afraid all the time so that think you need a freaking gun to go to Starbucks, if I can make you afraid all the time and you will see me as your savior, I can get you to do anything. Yep.
I can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, as he said.
Right? And he was right.
Yeah, I know.
There are people in progressives who were like, oh, my goodness, that's a terrible thing to say. And it's like, yeah, but he was right. Yeah. He could have killed somebody. Yeah. He could have killed one of his followers. Remember when there was that video of him in Erie, Pennsylvania, when he was running for his reelection. And it's cold. It's an outdoor rally. It's freezing. People have icicles hanging off of their noses. And he says to the crowd that he is trying to inspire to vote for him. I wouldn't even be in Erie if it wasn't for I had to do this for COVID and all of that.
Like Erie, why would I come to Erie?
Why would I come to Erie?
Yeah, and they start laughing.
That should lose him votes. People should go, wait a minute. That means what he's saying is he doesn't really care about us.
No, they all started laughing.
And they all laughed and took it. And it was like, because they're so afraid. Yeah. And that one of the things in 1984 is, war is peace, ignorance is strength. Yes. That acceptance, like I said, if you have to take a gun everywhere with you in the real world, that means you're a coward. That means you're scared all the time. Yeah. But in Trump's world, in the Republican world, in the world of fear, world of 1984, it makes you brave. Right. But if there's a scary situation and someone can walk in and out of it without a gun, that's bravery. Yeah. Always feeling like I got to go pick my kid up from school. I need a gun. I'm going down to pick up a muffin. I need a gun. Yeah. That means you're scared.
I'm going to go do some civil protest and I need an AK-47 on my back.
Right. Because nobody's going to attack you. So, but we've accepted this doublethink.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
This twist of reality that, so anyway, so that's why I wrote 1984. I think anytime you're doing an adaptation, putting it in your world and going, this is the immediate effect I'm trying to have, is part of activist theater. You know, It is the goal. And you don't want to preach to people, like I said, but you want to have a point of view.
Yeah.
You know, you want to have an objective. When I teach playwriting, I always tell people, if the audience leaves the theater essentially the same people they were when they entered, you failed. And if you can only change one person, you failed, because you need to change more people than that.
Yeah.
You know, that the goal is to change the whole world. That's what you shoot for when you're writing stuff. If everybody saw the play and everybody understood it, everything changes.
It's like raising the stakes when you're an actor. You know what? There's no use in doing things halfway. You got to go for it.
You got to go for it. Maybe you won't succeed, but then you try again. You know, otherwise you're just kind of sitting around, and you want to participate, to inspire people. Nothing is not a greater feeling. Okay, I can think of one, but you know, you don't want to talk about that on the radio. Then inspiring people, you know, doing mime troupe shows and having people come up to me afterwards and going, you know, I was about to give up. I didn't feel like there was anything else, or I'm a teacher and I don't feel seen, but we have a teacher character who's super passionate about doing stuff. Yeah. We did a show where I put in I was working with Tanya Schaefer on this one scene in a play that we were writing together. And she wrote this one scene, and she put in a letter carrier. And so when I worked with her on the scene, and we kind of bumped up all of this stuff about the letter carrier and gave them, music, letter carriers came up to us and they were like, thank you so much. Because they were saying how they're frequently the first responders. They're the people who find people who've passed out. They call in 911. They know the community, and they say, we're part of it. And they were just like, thank you for seeing us. Yeah. And those feelings that you can get when you're doing something that's not just about you and your mommy, you know, when you're writing a play, I don't want to see your public psychosis. I don't want to see your psychiatry on stage or how you work out problems with your relations. I don't care. The question is, what does that have to do with the audience? And there may be a way it does have something to do with the audience. But if you write it just to make yourself feel better, to work out your issues, who cares?
Oh, I know.
That's me. It shouldn't be theater. In order for it to be active, in order for it to be the place what the community comes to, it's the place where people come to get answers to societal problems. All these issues are going on, and there's an analysis going on over there that's entertaining, and it's got songs and dancing and puppets and trained weasels or whatever. And you go and see that to be entertained, but to also to learn about the community and maybe have some stuff answered for you. And so the great place, like A Long Day's Journey into Night, it talks about these family dynamics in a way that still touches people. Yeah. It's like, what is the society? Is my family is the society in microcosm. Yeah. You know, and what are the power dynamics? And, you know, that's still a family play, but it still affects people. Yeah.
All the great plays make you think about, well, what does this say about me? Where am I in this situation? How do I relate to the people in my life, given what I just saw happening up there? Or challenge your own values. I mean, one of the things I love about Mime Troupe's plays and ones I've seen, there's a lot of satire. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of, sometimes I have to go, I don't know about that. You know, and it makes me think, like, why am I questioning it? You know, where do I stand on this? You know, and it can be uncomfortable, but that's okay.
What we shoot for. Yeah. You know, I think the Mime Troupe has always done, and I definitely shoot for that. What is the injustice that we're presenting on stage? How is the audience given their tacit approval to this terrible situation by accepting it? Like I said, with 1984 and the torture done in our name, but also, like I said, the environmental injustice, the racism, the sexism, all the stereotypes that the audience has accepted. Yeah, they've accepted these things, and they'll still on somewhere in their mind, they still look up to the wealthy as if they're anything but fortunate.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And so to challenge the audience in different ways so that, you know, there's always this thing about preaching to the choir. People say, oh, don't you guys just preach to the choir? It's like, first of all, no. You
Not
don't.
when you're doing it in Mitchell Park in the middle of Palo Alto.
Yeah.
That's not the choir.
That's not the choir.
And people show up anyway.
Yeah. And the audience, I mean, sometimes the choir needs preaching. Sometimes
and you know what I think sometimes is they see Mime Troupe and people go, oh, let's go watch the mime show.
Yeah.
And then they get a dose of something maybe they weren't expecting.
Yeah. And hopefully they'll come back. I remember 2 years ago, we were doing Treasure Island, which I wrote about. The actual, for people who don't know, in San Francisco Bay, there's an island called Treasure Island. Yeah. And it was an Army base. It was, a Navy base. And it was also where it was built for for one of the World's Fairs. Yes. But since then, it has become so polluted it's so radioactive. It is so unhealthy to be there.
And there's people who live there in public housing.
Right. And that they put public housing out there, and now they're trying to sell it as as kind of the future housing of San Francisco. Yeah. But the people who've been out there have been ill. They've been sick. There are places you can't even go. It's they tell you if your kids are going to play, they can't dig in the ground. These are kids. Yeah. They can't dig in the ground because something might come up. It's terrible, but it's a way for people to make money. And so that's sort of when I wrote My Treasure Island. It's very much based on the novel. Yeah. But it was where instead of pirates, they're developers. Right. And, you know, and the treasure is the money that could be made out of Treasure Island. That's what it is. The island is actually the treasure. And we had sword fights and everything. It was great fun. Mm-hmm. And so we did the show down in Redwood City, I think, or maybe Brisbane. And it was a small crowd because we had to stuff the show in. We had to add it. So we had a very small audience. But a guy came up and gave us like $150. He had never heard of the Mime Troupe. He had never seen a show. He had shown up because like his kid was taking a class in a building nearby. And he dropped the kid off and he was like, oh, what's going on over here? And then he was like, and he had just moved to the Bay Area to work in Silicon Valley. So he had dough. And he was like, this is amazing. I love it. You do this all the time? I really want to support you guys. You know, that kind of, you know, oh, that's what theater can do. Yeah. People are either super pissed, and we do get people get super pissed, but mainly they're like, when we did the show Seeing Double, which is about Palestine and Israel, and we did it around the United States, we got bomb threats, you know. People were so mad. It was one of the most popular shows in the history of the troupe. We toured it around the country for 2 years. We took it to East and West Jerusalem. And while we were there, people were like, you can't do the show over here. Somebody will shoot you. And you can't do the show over here because they'll just throw a grenade. Actually, the only pushback we got was from the government. Everybody else was happy we were doing the show. And there would be big discussions after the play with Palestinians and Israelis who said they had never spoken to each other. They did not know how to start a conversation with each other. Wow. So...
Wow, that is something. I didn't know that you went there. How wonderful.
Yeah.
And so the government was giving you the pushback.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And they tried at one point to stop us. And is like one of the Chief Justice of the Israeli Supreme Court had to come down on our side and say, no, they can do the show. Yeah. This is free. This is what freedom of speech is supposed to look like. But at the end of the play, we had a part where we had a Palestinian flag and an Israeli flag, and they would cross. And that was too much for the Israeli government. They stepped in and said, you cannot show a Palestinian flag. You could, and we said, well, then we can't show the Israeli flag either. So what we did, this was the last image in the show. So what happened is we would get up to that point and we would bow. And then the director would step forward, who was in that production. He stepped forward and said, here's how the show's supposed to end. Ah. Cool. And he would tell that story. And the audience, the Israeli audience was like, our government stopped you from doing that? Wow. And they said we couldn't show the Palestinian flag. At one point, we had a flag that said censored, and the other one said censored because the other one censored. And the government said, you can't do that because that implies we're censoring you. But you are censoring us. They said, you can't talk about it. You can't say that. So there's a power in theater that people don't understand. I was doing an interview with the Denver Post one time, and they said, well, really, can you give me one example of a time where theater really had an impact? And I said, the Civil War. When Harriet Beecher Stowe writes Uncle Tom's Cabin, most Americans are illiterate, you know, and the people in the North did not really have much of an idea of what slavery was.
Yeah.
And they couldn't read the book. But there were hundreds of adaptations of Uncle Tom's Cabin, stage adaptations that played all over the country.
Huh.
And, you know, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people saw that, and that outraged them.
Wow.
The play outraged them because they couldn't read the book.
Yeah.
When Abraham Lincoln meets Harriet Beecher Stowe and he says, oh, so you're the little lady who started this big war. It wasn't the book that showed the horrors. It was the play.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow.
Yeah. So theater can have this great effect if we use it like that. It is an amazing tool for folks, and especially if you do free shows like we do, or companies that do a free evening of something, to constantly tell. Like I also tell people, theater, strange as it sounds, is a way for the working class to talk to itself. Because you can't do that in movies, because you have to have these big corporations to get distribution. You might make a great film, but to get it distributed, you need to work with corporations, and they're going to say you can't say that about capitalism.
Yeah.
Television, same. It's even worse.
Worse.
But theater, all you need to do theater is a good idea, a script, a concept, and a place.
Yeah.
And then you can do it. And even if it's just for the people at the bus stop, you can have an impact.
Right.
You know?
I mean, I think of a musical like Hair, where they with the nudity and the police coming in. I guess one time they really did. And then
yeah.
I think that shaped a lot of our ideas about freedom and individuality and everything that we have now.
Hair was the first play I remember seeing.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Mine was what musical? Can't remember. I'll remember in a second.
My parents took me to see Hair as a little kid.
Oh, okay.
And we had gone to a lot of protests. My parents took me to every anti-war protest around, me and my sisters. We were at riots, all of this stuff.
Oh, my parents were opposite. They were the crew cut.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know, the back then it was either black or white. Either you were the hippie or you were the crew cut gang, you know.
My father had been he'd been in the Army. Yeah. My parents were from Detroit. They came from well, my father had a very weird history, but my mom, very much everybody in her family worked for Ford, and my parents came out to California when I was like 2 or 3, but you know, the war's going on, the civil rights movement's going on, and so they're taking me and my sisters to every protests that turned into famous riots. You know, things were running from the cops and stuff, but it was like, this is your job as a citizen. My mother, okay, here's a weird story, and I have a lot of weird stories. My mother worked for Bobby Kennedy when he was running, and for those of you who don't know, Bobby Kennedy was running for president in 1968. He was the brother of John F. Kennedy, but Bobby Kennedy was different. He was younger. He had long hair. He had to sweep his hair away from his eyes. He was anti-war. He was running for civil rights. He was a completely different generation.
He got rid of the mob.
Right. Yeah. He had fought against the mob. He had done all of this stuff. And he was running for president, and it was a chance for a lot of the stuff to get cemented into place, even that LBJ, Dick that he was, had done in terms of, you know, war on poverty and the Great Society and all of this stuff. So Bobby Kennedy was running, and Bobby Kennedy was going to win because people still had a good, strong sense of the Kennedys, even though John F. Kennedy had definitely his ups and downs. But Bobby Kennedy was this further step towards being progressive. He understood, even though he came from a rich family, he really understood poverty because he had really studied it. So Bobby Kennedy's running for president, and he was assassinated in Los Angeles right before he could go off. He'd won California, and he was going to go to the 1968 Chicago convention, get the nomination, and defeat Nixon. Nixon had no chance against Kennedy. But that night of declaring victory for the California primary, he was assassinated. My mother was there when he was assassinated. She worked for him. She was what's known as a Kennedy girl. When he was assassinated, people thought my mother, the government, the FBI specifically, thought my mother might have been a witness. So she kind of had to go into witness protection. That night, the next day she flew back to Detroit and was hiding out with her family. And when she flew back, our whole family moved to San Francisco immediately.
Wow.
Because the FBI said, they didn't want the witnesses killed like they were after John F. Kennedy's assassination. So where do you want to go to be safe? And my parents picked San Francisco because they thought this is where the revolution was going to start. And they wanted to be at the epicenter of it.
Yeah.
So that was my parents.
Wow.
They came up here. I remember going to meetings with the Black Panthers, and my parents. I mean, my father worked in Silicon Valley. He was like one of the first Black engineers in Silicon Valley. My mother was working for different companies.
Where did he work?
He worked at a company at first called Amdahl.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Ampex because my dad was at Ampex. Okay.
Oh yeah.
No, I used to work at Amdahl. I was a security guard in high school.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, Amdahl was started by a guy from IBM who wanted to start his own separate company because he said IBM was too corporate. It just wasn't innovative enough. So he started Amdahl, and he hired my father and a few other engineers. So my father was there for, a decade or two. But yeah, that period, trying to change the world, actively change the world, is something that we've kind of lost in a reactionary period ever since that was cemented by Reagan. The idea that everything used to be fine.
Absolutely, it was Reagan. And I was at Cal, I remember, and all of a sudden Berkeley went from a very activist, liberal, progressive school to a completely Reaganite, conservative everything, like overnight.
Well, remember when Berkeley was cheap? I paid like $230 a quarter or something. $168. I mean, it was. Did you go there? No. I did. I went. They actually gave me a free quarter because my grades were so good at City College of San Francisco.
Oh, City College.
That's what I could afford to go to.
Yeah.
And I ended up going to State. But all these schools were cheap. Working class kids able to go to these schools, that impacted.
That was
things.
me.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of the Berkeley students who were in the freedom rides that went to the South during the civil rights movement to register voters, they came back. And that was where the free speech movement came from. We need to talk about politics. But these were working class kids. And when Reagan came in and he slashed all the money to the schools and Proposition 13 happened, suddenly only these schools are now seen as elite schools.
Right.
Schools where rich kids go. And that just is going to kill a great deal of the politics. Yeah. The teachers might still have a sense of, well, we've got to change the world. But the students are like, why? The world works out fine for me. And suddenly Berkeley starts looking more like Stanford,
Yeah, no kidding.
with all of the very conservative politics that Stanford pushes. That idea of putting higher education out of reach of the working class, or making it so that if you can get there, it's because of student loans. And your student loans are going to be a shackle, perhaps for the rest of your life. If you get a job, you got to keep that job because you got to keep paying off these student loans.
And I did not have to get student loans, and I couldn't afford to go there the way it is now. My parents could never have paid. And also, unless you were really poor, you couldn't get enough money in aid.
Right.
Or your only option was to take out these ridiculous loans, as you said. But that's why I didn't go to Stanford or anything like that. I went to Cal because it was basically free. Yeah. People can believe that. I mean, one of the best schools in the country was basically free.
Right.
And now it's just it costs the same as Stanford, as you say. And so there's no difference.
It's cheaper to go to Harvard.
Yeah.
And they always say, oh, we're doing all of this outreach at Berkeley. But a great many of the students that they will do all this outreach for, working class kids, have to drop out. They're like, we gave you a scholarship. It's like, yeah, but my parents still can't make their rent. They need me to have a job.
Yeah.
The working class kids drop out of Berkeley, not because they can't make it,
right,
but because they have to help their parents
exactly
pay their bills. If the school was free, then that would alleviate some of that. But we have to make it so that, it's like a good tide raises all boats. We need it so that the parents aren't impoverished. The parents shouldn't need their kid to have to give up their education to make sure they don't become homeless.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it looks good on paper. Yeah. A lot of schools is like, yes, but look, we've got 10,000 new working class students. And a year later, 9,000 of them have had to drop out. But then the next year they go, look, we've got 10,000 more, so they can promote that. But the whole society needs to change. If we want the whole society to change, the whole society needs to change.
Yeah.
It's not these little bitty things. And we have to take the profit margin out of everything. Right. We've got a country where luxuries are seen as necessities and necessities are seen as luxuries.
Right.
Healthcare, education, clean air, clean water. Those are the things you have to fight for to get funded. Yeah. And it's always, how can we make money off of that? But necessities, everybody's got to have a cell phone. Right. We have accepted that we have to have all of these things. And we see those as necessities. Yeah. And kids are grown up with having to have all these things that are actually luxuries.
Yeah. Because we have the best propaganda in the world in this country. So the government and corporations have all really learned how to make really good propaganda that sells people. Like, I remember when I was a kid, you'd see the Soviet propaganda and it was laughable, and probably most of the people in the Soviet Union didn't believe it. But our propaganda is so good, like Fox News. Well, I think it sucks because I never watched them, so of course we see right through it. But the people who watch it day after day after day, it seems real to them. It seems
absolutely
real. And the marketing, the commercials, the endless selling of social media. It's scary. It plays on it sells people's minds. It turns people into something they're not, and
you
they
go from
lose themselves.
You're a consumer, not a citizen.
Yeah.
But I would say
you're an object. You're a consumer. You're being used.
You are basically an obstacle between me, who wants to get your money, and your money.
Yes.
You're just an obstacle in the way. And how can I get around you? Can I fool you into giving it to me? Mm-hmm. Can I steal it from you? Yeah. But I would say, even as a kid, because I was raised in the super left household. Not incredibly left, but pretty left. And so I saw the propaganda on both sides.
Yeah.
I would see, well, this is what the Soviet Union is saying to their citizens.
Yeah.
This is what the Americans are saying to their citizens. They're both lies.
Yeah, I didn't see when I was little. I didn't notice the American part, except that the only thing is I lived in a really, really conservative household, and I didn't realize it. And one time, I love this story. It was McGovern against Reagan running. I think it was right after the Kennedy problem.
McGovern, yeah.
Or the next 4 years.
That would have been McGovern.
Not Reagan. I'm sorry. McGovern.
McGovern Nixon.
Against Nixon. Sorry, I got it mixed up. And we had a mock election, and I voted for McGovern. And I was so proud of myself because I thought, well, my parents must have done the same thing. And I go home and, they tell me, oh, no, we voted for Nixon. And I'm like, I was in shock. Like, my parents voted for Nixon. I think Watergate had already started and he got reelected.
Right. And still, yeah.
I'm sorry, what were you saying?
No, but I was saying the thing about propaganda, like watching the Vietnam War, which was on the television all the time in my house.
Oh, my God.
And seeing that the difference between what we were told we were doing and what was actually happening, that, we had to destroy the village to save the village idea, and going out and being in anti-war protests and then seeing how they're portrayed on television.
Yeah.
And that's the first, like, wait a minute, that's not what happened. I was there as a kid.
Yeah.
And we weren't rioting and then the police showed up and we started running. But the way they cut it together on the news made it look like we had started the fight.
Oh, yeah.
And we
right.
didn't.
Right.
And the same stuff with the Black Panthers and the American Indian movement and the Young Lords, all these organizations that were actively helping the community, but the way they were portrayed was extraordinarily negative and dangerous.
Yeah.
And I mean, how is this different from what the Soviet Union is doing?
Totally. You know, I totally believed up until maybe I was 30 years old that the Black Panthers were a terrible group of people. When I was in college, my girlfriend started going on bike rides with Huey Newton.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I was just furious. I mean, do you know who he is? I mean,
yeah,
I was sold on the whole thing at that point.
Right.
I mean, I know better now.
Yeah.
But,
I always thought the clearest that everybody should be able to relate in terms of American propaganda, especially towards the Soviet Union, was remember when the Soviet Union still existed, and for its good and bad and the amazing stuff they did and the terrible stuff they did, what we always saw on the news was a little gray, if you'll recall.
Yeah.
Whenever they show something from the Soviet Union, it was a little gray.
Always.
And the idea was that the women were all fat and hairy.
Yeah, dreary, gray. People never smiled.
Horrible. As soon as the Soviet Union fell,
yes,
suddenly Russian women were considered beautiful.
Yes, and they were smiling and happy, and we saw happy people on the TV.
And the colors were bright, and there were all these lonely American men who were like, ooh, Russian brides.
I always say that to my wife. I said, well, I used to see the Soviet Union on the TV when I was a kid. It was always awful. They seemed depressed. No one smiled. It was like all ugly buildings. And then as soon as that turned over, it was like happy people everywhere. It's like,
right. As soon as capitalism,
so we were choosing that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the thing is what we were doing was just shading it. You know, it's like when that famous shot of O.J. Simpson when they put him on the cover of, I think it was Newsweek, and they darkened him.
Yeah.
You know?
They made they made him very harsh looking.
Right. They changed, and that was propaganda. Guilty or whatever. Yeah. That's still propaganda.
Right.
And so those, 26-year-old gorgeous Russian women were 25 last year. They weren't fat and hairy, Yeah. They didn't suddenly change. Those women had been there all the time. All of those brilliant and talented people in the Soviet Union. And if you watch video, I was watching a video recently of someone snowboarding across Russia. Really an interesting video. Yeah. It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
The buildings were so interesting. The colors were so vibrant. The people were extraordinarily nice. The snow, everything about it. I was like, that looks beautiful. It's different than here.
Yeah.
But all of that was there before.
Right.
And we were told that didn't exist.
Yes.
That kind of propaganda. How did the United States end up in Vietnam? Why were we involved in this other countries trying to stop their election, which is how it started. That all of these things that we were told about socialism, about communism, about the Black Panthers, like I said, and the Young Lords and the American Indian movement and women who are feminism, and environmentalists, all of this stuff. We've been loaded with so much all of that propaganda, but so much anti-human propaganda and so much pro-corporate propaganda. When someone says, oh, well, we need government to be run more like a business, that person is an idiot.
Absolutely. Because
government is a not-for-profit organization. It provides free services in exchange for tax money, like every other nonprofit theater company or health company or anything. It's a not-for-profit. You can't run it as a for-profit because it doesn't have customers.
Right. And we are supposed to be them. We are the government.
And we are the government.
Yeah.
So this idea that so many people, you can talk to people who may even be progressive. They may see themselves as or liberal, but they'll still accept the idea that government should be run like a business. And it's like, how? How does that happen? It's something that we accepted and that capitalism has, through the propaganda, has pushed into everyone's mind. So we need the rebooting of the working class, the rebooting of the country, hopefully with a new and hopefully legal administration. We'll have some sense of that. I mean, the Democratic Party is always kind of screwed because the progressive branch wants to change things, but the conservative side of the party doesn't want to offend their corporate sponsors.
Right.
You know,
what did you mean legal presidency or legal government?
I mean, what I mean is basically, you know, Trump didn't win the first election, and has in his time in office. In
the popular vote, you mean?
Yeah, he didn't win the popular vote, which the electoral college was created basically for the same way that the Senate, which makes no sense, exists.
Yeah, right.
It's basically the big agrarian states would not have joined the original colonies because they knew that if it was just the House of Representatives, New York and Philadelphia were going to run the country.
Yeah, it was just all a big compromise so that they wouldn't go away.
And that compromise no longer stopped functioning a century ago when as the country, you know, basically destroyed all the native peoples to make it a bigger country, and there's cities all over the place.
Yeah.
It's anti-democratic.
And also, what's the point of the electoral college if all the electors, which I'm glad they do, go with the proportion of votes anyway? What's the point of even having it? All it's going to do is possibly screw up the popular vote like it did last time.
Right. And the idea that the electors are not actually bound to do that. They can go against.
Right. But thank God they don't.
Well, yeah.
I mean, they have a couple times, but it hasn't mattered in recent history.
I mean, we've ended up the last first term Republican president to win the popular election was George Bush Sr.
Yeah, right.
1988 was the last time a Republican didn't run for re-election, but just ran for president and won the popular vote.
That's why they knew they had to do the voter suppression.
Right. But when you think about it, so every time since then, if the Republicans have the White House, they're a minority government. They're a minority party, which is also very ironic considering they hate minorities.
Right. Good point.
Yeah, but they don't mind it when they're it.
Yeah.
So this struggle that we've had in this country increasingly is about minority rule. Capitalists are an incredibly tiny minority of Americans. White men are an incredibly minority of Americans. And so that small group, and it's not just, and then inside of white men, there's the working class.
Right.
We've got rich white men. I mean, but also just the idea that if you can divide the working class by race and by sex, Trump keeps winning certain groups, you know?
Yep.
And how does that happen? Because he's made them fearful and he's convinced them that anything that anybody else gets is less of what they have. If this person gets the right to vote, that diminishes my vote. If this person has health care, then that diminishes my health care. If they have civil rights, somehow I don't have as many civil rights. Yeah. It's a zero-sum businessman's proposition.
Right.
A winner equals there being a loser.
Yeah.
And things don't work that way. And countries cannot work that way.
No, they can't. I also think he has gotten to people on a psychological level where he is sort of the prototypical bully who people feel they need to identify with in order to be safe.
Right, because he will sue you. He loves suing people.
Yeah, and it's just it's more of a symbolic thing. I mean, he's not going to come to your house and do anything to you, but it just brings up feelings that people have that they're not even aware of, you know, from their childhood or whatever.
I also wonder, it's like, do you also where it's like, wait a minute, what if I was on Fifth Avenue and Trump was there and had a gun? He could get away with shooting me. Damn, nobody's afraid.
They never think that far.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's like I said, so theater in general, opportunity for us to really impact and change things. All plays are political. Yeah. You're either upholding the status quo or you are challenging the status quo.
Yeah.
Them's your options.
That's what I love about Shakespeare.
Yeah.
I wish sometimes with Shakespeare you could stop and explain things to people like you're doing with your Christmas Carol or Red Carol.
You know, what I would like them to be able to stop in most Shakespeare, I think I mentioned this yesterday, is to just have, you know, whatever, Richard III or Henry IV or whoever, or Henry V even, just stop in the middle of the play, turn to the audience and go, you know, we're all French, right? You know that we were conquered by the Vikings and then the French, and the French keep conquering us. Yeah. Every time, you notice how every time in a Shakespeare play, somebody gets booted out of being king, and they're like, we've got to go somewhere and raise an army. They go to France.
Yeah, exactly. Always.
Because they're just part of France, kind of. You know?
Yeah, William the Conqueror started all that.
Yeah, and you know, Richard the Lionheart was French. Right. He spent no time in England, almost. Yeah. They're all French.
Yeah.
And Shakespeare did. That's the thing with Shakespeare's propaganda, is that he convinced the English that their rulers of just a few generations ago were English somehow. And it's like, no, they're French. They speak French in the court. It is the language of the court.
Yeah.
You know. Until very late.
That's why so many of our legal terms are French.
Yes.
And a lot of words that we don't use, we tend to use the more Germanic words, but there are a lot of French equivalents to the words that we don't use in English that we could use.
Well, like the one that they talk about a lot is cows and chicken versus poultry.
Yeah.
They're the same thing. Pigs and poultry, same thing. The court used the term poultry. Because it's from French. Yeah. Poulet. It's from the French. The court used beef because beef.
Yeah, cow.
The English, the commoners used the more Viking, more Germanic terms, you know, cow and chicken.
Exactly, yeah.
That, you know, so when you wonder why these other words, it's because they're still speaking French or a version of French.
Yeah.
Up until, like I said, like Henry VII.
Right.
So what Shakespeare does is a lot of his plays are propaganda to justify why the Tudors are in.
Yeah.
And then suddenly why the Tudors aren't in and why the Stuarts are in.
Right. His benefactors.
Yeah, right. His benefactors. He's just justifying. And the plays are beautiful and amazing and startling. And there's all this great stuff in it. But there's also this seam of just propaganda, because this is what the person who's paying for it.
Yeah.
If Wells
you don't
Fargo
want to piss off the king or the queen, things could get really ugly.
And it comes back to why the Mime Troupe doesn't take corporate money and corporate sponsorships, because there'd always be that moment where suddenly the banker would show up and save the day.
Right. So the Mime Troupe and your show, we should probably start wrapping it up. We've been talking for a long time. I could go on for another few hours, but
it's fun.
I have to edit this thing. So
that's going to be hard. You might just have to go, this is a big 2-parter, 3-parter episode.
Yeah, maybe.
Because I don't shut up. So the Mime Troupe.
I don't either, but like I purposely let you talk because this is your thing, but my wife is telling me, do you ever stop talking? No. I was watching an episode of Schitt's Creek last night. It was hilarious. Do you ever watch that show?
Mm-hmm.
When they were in the girlfriend was in bed with the guy. It's like, he says, well, you just have to talk all the time. Well, if I don't talk, no one's ever going to talk ever again, and neither one of us will ever talk. And then what's going to happen? And
yeah,
that's me.
It's like everybody needs to have that, I think, on some level. Yeah. If you got something to say it.
Hell yeah.
But I just won't stop. So the Mime Troupe's O Red Carol will be on, radio stations, hopefully around the world. If anybody's interested, contact us if you want it on your radio station. But it'll also be on the Mime Troupe website, and we might run it every year. We're thinking about doing that. It's just the activist Christmas carol that you always wanted.
Yes.
And it's going to be on your website, definitely.
Yes. And it starts on December 11th, I believe.
Is there any way we can find out what the radio station schedule
that will be on our website once the stations are starting to kind of get past Thanksgiving now and turn towards it. So there will be, like, if you go to our website now, you'll still see the radio schedule for Tales of the Resistance and all of those shows and all those stations. But we're still working with those stations to set up their schedules. Mm-hmm. Some of them are going to be, like they're going to run it once or twice. Yeah. Some of them are going to try to run it regularly. But if people can't find it that way, they can also go to the Mime Troupe website and just listen to it there.
I would just love to listen to it on the radio, though.
Yeah,
I went to RADA years ago, and I used to listen to the radio plays on the radio there, and I loved it.
Well, there's a different feeling. Like if you go onto a website, and you listen to a play or a song or something like that, as far as you know, you're the only person doing that right then. But when you listen to something on the radio, it's more like going to a concert. You're having a shared experience. You know there are other people doing
exactly. Yes. Yeah. And you can't stop. You can't like, oh, I'm going to listen later on. So you have to pay attention. And and you have to stick with it because you can't pause it.
That's another thing about plays and theater, that every time a theater audience is a self-selecting community of people, of like-minded people who've all decided for one reason or another to go and have this experience and see this play now. And so they can turn to each other and go, that was interesting. What did you think? It is the same thing with movies. I remember one time I was going down to see a film downtown, and I was at the back of the bus sitting there, and somebody that was on the bus worked at the theater I was going to. And so I asked them about the movie, and it turned out a bunch of the people on the bus were going to the movie. And so we all talked about the movie beforehand. And we were like, what is this? And what is that? And oh, I saw this one. I saw that one. People were so hungry and anxious to have actual communication. I've done that a few times where I've actually started conversations on buses about politics with people, and it ends up becoming this big community meeting.
Oh, cool.
Because people want to have interactions. They want to talk about stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to create community, but unfortunately it's easy to make people think that that's somehow wrong.
Right.
To be isolated. Yeah. And so the more you keep up your sense of community, the more you're talking to people who aren't like you or your family, the easier it is to see everything as possible and to see your fellow folks as humans, like in Christmas.
Love it. How do you feel? I'm having such a hard time with the fact that my community, the theater community, has kind of been dashed with this COVID-19 thing. I mean, I feel lost sometimes. Like I can't go to plays. I can't be in plays. I can't direct anything except for on Zoom. I don't talk to the people I used to talk to all the time for some reason. Like when the virus first hit, we were calling each other all the time, and now that's stopped. I don't know what the heck's going on.
It's very tough. I mean, I got into a group, the Thursday at 7 group, which is like Aldo Billingsley and Jim Carpenter and Margot Hall and Elizabeth Carter, all this huge group of Bay Area actors who do readings. So every Thursday night, there's a play reading. It's still not satisfying because no matter what you do with Zoom or FaceTime or Skype or any of them, you can't make eye contact.
No. Like even right here, right now, I'm struggling. And I've always struggled. I'm still struggling with this Zoom thing. Is like, it's really hard for me to listen as well as I usually can. I get easily distracted by my own stupid face over here. I'm still struggling with that.
I had to really train myself because I've been doing all these interviews. I've been interviewing people.
Yeah.
Ex-mime troopers to kind of get this big library of interviews with mime troupe people. And one of the things I've had to train myself to do is to treat it like a phone call. So I look at the camera. Yeah,
I noticed you're doing that.
Yeah. Because then at least if they do that, if the people I'm talking to do that, when I look back on the recording, it looks like they're looking at me.
Yeah.
And so the experience of doing it feels very isolating and weird.
Yeah.
But if I think of it as a phone call, it feels okay.
Oh, because then you can just, then you're just doing this like as if you're listening to the person.
Yeah.
With the thing on your ear. Yeah. I mean, when I was directing, I directed a couple of plays on Zoom and I was getting people to do that. Look at the camera. I know it feels weird, but it's so much better. And here I'm not doing it. Now I'm doing it. And yes, it feels weird, but it's good for the audience.
You get used to it. Yeah. Because one of the things with Zoom what we talked about the other day, the Zoom fatigue, is because when you're meeting with someone in person, you're picking up on all of their physical traits and all of the messages that they're sending with where their eyes are and how they're sitting and all of that stuff, and their eye contact. And when you're on a phone, you dismiss all of that stuff and you're just going on their voice.
Yeah.
Zoom meetings and video meetings fool you because they're in between. You feel like you should be able to get all of this stuff from the person, but you don't get eye contact. You don't see all of this stuff.
And when you try, you miss more.
Right. You miss more. And you also then it's harder. It's more exhausting.
Totally.
Yeah. So any of the viewers out there, if you're getting Zoom fatigue, it's a real thing.
Yeah.
And just remember, you can talk to people on the phone. I had somebody called me up one time. Yeah. I mean, I was texting somebody and they said, yeah, so we're going to set up a Zoom meeting with you. And I was like, can we just talk on the phone?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, yeah, right. The phone. It's like, exactly.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at the camera right now. I actually feel relaxed.
Yeah.
Because when I try to watch, when I try to watch you on the screen, it's not as the same as if you were sitting next to me. And I'm wondering if it's because it's 2-dimensional instead of 3-dimensional. I'm not picking up your vibe. You know, it's like I'm something's missing. And as I'm working to do it, I can't find it. But when I don't look at you, I listen better. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a little lesson for everybody who's watching right now.
Zoom technique. Not only do you find out about the San Francisco Mime Troupe, Red Carol, coming up on December 11th, but you learn Zoom techniques.
Zoom techniques.
Well, it's been great talking to you, Michael.
Yeah, you too, Ray. It's been fun.
Really appreciate it. And I'll put everything up in the notes, and then I'll also add it later once we have the dates of the radio plays.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, okay.
And hopefully we'll be able to be back in theaters and amongst each other sooner rather than later.
Let's see another Christmas. You know this place?
Know it. I worked here for years. My first job, working for old
Ebenezer! Ebenezer, where are you?
Fezziwig.
Yo ho, Ebenezer. No more work tonight. Hurry, hurry. We have to close the desk, shutter up the windows, sweep the floor, and clear space.
Space? For what?
For what? For what? For dancing, Ebenezer. It's Christmas Eve. Now everyone dance.
There is power in a band of working folk when they stand hand in hand. That's a power that must rule in every land. One industrial union brand.
Come all you workers from every land, come join in the grand industrial band. Then we our share of this earth shall demand. Let's unite and together take a stand.
There is power in a band of working folk when they stand hand in hand. That's a power that must rule in every land. One industrial union brand.
Used to be folks were proud to be workers, proud to live off their own brains and sweat, not live off somebody else's. Used to be they knew ain't but two classes, us that work in the factories, fields, and offices, and them that owns those factories, fields, and offices. And the sooner us workers are proud to be us and stop trying to be them, the sooner we get together, that's when we'll get and keep what we've been working for.
There is power in a band of working folk when they stand hand in hand. That's a power that must rule in every land. One industrial union brand.
That's right.
One industrial union brand.
Wonderful, simply wonderful. Merry Christmas.